I'm sure everyone is well aware of how I feel about My Hero Academia. It was my series, something that defined me, and despite that, it turned into something I was honestly disgusted by. It didn't resemble itself. The characters I once loved started going against what I thought they stood for. I just had to get away. In the manga community, when your series goes to shit and you're forced to jump ship, we call that a rebound manga, and everyone's is different. Some My Hero fans went to Jujutsu Kaisen, only to find out that story at times could be equally frustrating. Some have now settled into Gachiakuta, a series that I currently adore but by all means can never fill the same gaps MHA did. What was mine? It was Black Clover. In some ways, BC's hopeful nature gets in the way of some of the things it wants to say or should say. However, there is an infectious love for the characters Tabata exhibits that just can't be understated. When you had arcs like Royal Knights that were a complete celebration of the cast, the Elf Saga being a place of reflection for the world at large and a test for every character, and even the controversial Spade arc, pushing the cast to their limits and forcing them to hold on to any semblance of their beliefs and then being rewarded for it, albeit in clumsy ways. Spade is an arc that, to keep it somewhat spoiler free for now, has arguably most spectacular set pieces I've seen in a while, and despite some of its shortcomings, I really appreciated that it was so centered around character, because after a while, the bigger shonen tend to neglect their cast in favor of something more intangible, like the plot. This isn't a Jujutsu Kaisen where the author only really uses characters as plot devices, or MHA where certain characters are deformed on a meta level for the sake of something darker, or Chainsaw Man where the characters are consistently molested. BC is one of those series where its identity is cemented from beginning to end, for better and worse. A cheerful story about togetherness, a sense of community when the world delists you, and how power, misunderstandings, and social divides corrupts the possibilities of great friendships. Black Clover was that in its first chapter, and never really diverges from it for the rest of the series. Especially since, again, from the start, Black Clover set out to be a fantasy. I mean that in the genre sense, but also kind of literally. Its mission statement was that friendship will always be magic. That doesn't mean I agree with all of Tabata's writing choices, but when your outlook on the media is shriveled as a whole, like mine was during my heartbreak period, Black Clover is refreshing in that it all feels homogeneous. There are shonen manga with such deep things to say about the human condition: My Hero's societal critique, Jujutsu Kaisen's view on death and memories, and Chainsaw Man's exploration of a love language. They're ambitious, which is why I can kind of understand why these stories have so many shooters. They touch on topics that resonate with most people. The problem is, as I've discussed in prior videos, the way these stories touch on these topics are very shallow. They simply ask provocative questions, even though they pose no credible stances or answers. Of course, Black Clover has things it wants to say and talk about, and because of its characters and world building, it did those things really well, like with the topic of classism. But because of the simplicity of the writing, it never attempts that extra mile like these other stories do, and part of it is because I think Black Clover wants to write within its demographic, and there's something beautiful about that. After all, just because you make 12-year-old Japanese boys wonder whether the chicken or egg came first, doesn't mean your ability as a writer suddenly increases. But then, was my love for BC conditional? Is the fact I like Black Clover more than something like Jujutsu Kaisen because JJK failed where BC never tried? Is BC good by default then? Is Black Clover being antithetical to these stories beneficial or something I fundamentally desire? Is BC truly better for not taking on as many deep and dense topics? Or was I really just going through a tough breakup with other manga at the time and needed something extremely different? I don't know, because I read Black Clover and I liked it, and once again, it succeeds in its talk of discrimination and classism where other stories might falter, but there's just something about it that tells me that all of its greatest qualities come from the story limiting itself, for whatever purpose that may be for. You could tell me this whole manga was just written for Tabata's daughter, and I wouldn't even bat an eye, because it has things to say about family, worth, loneliness, but doesn't always bother with the ever-expansive details, instead opting to be more humorous and blissful in its tone, especially later on with things like its world building or how the later story kind of just drops the discrimination subplot for devil lore, bar Noelle and her ever-present and ever-pleasant subplot, which has remained pretty thematically consistent. I mean, does anyone remember when Asta was a refugee for a few chapters? So I ask again, is my love for Black Clover conditional? Well, maybe I could answer that more confidently if the manga wasn't currently in the place it is. Tabata has such an immense love for the cast of Black Clover that seemingly anything miserable, tragic, or of consequence happening to them would break his little heart. That's why the character depths are so low, the stakes are constantly uprooting itself, why the power system will go leaps and bounds and break itself just to assure the comfort of the cast. And I think me and many others have problems with that. In stories, you need a push and pull. You need darkness so the light is that much brighter, especially in Shounen. However, again, at the time of me first reading it, this gimmick of Black Clovers didn't bother me too much. I was simply just having a good time with the characters, and sometimes an enjoyable cast and an easygoing tone is all you really need. Plus, the fan base was, kind of nice to me, so there was always that. I haven't read Black Clover in a while. I was going to for this video, but I just don't think I can stand to look at it. Is BC in a worse spot than JJK or MHA was? Yeah, it kind of is, yeah. When manga become disillusioned with their pre-existing identity, their new less than stellar third act identity was at least founded on something. Writing tics the authors fell atop of, big mistakes they just now have to commit to, or just a perfectly clear desire to get the f*** out of here, so to speak. Black Clover is somehow all of these at once, and something like a lot worse. And for a story that was so infectious because it loved itself so dearly, to put it frankly, it's weird seeing Black Clover fall out of love with itself. Whether it be Asta for the first time in the series, questioning himself, his worth, and his strength, only to get over it a chapter later. Final arc fights that seem way too short for their own good, with paladin fights skipped left and right, or anti-magic being passed around like a blunt, which makes the individuality of the characters irrelevant, while also just breaking the power system even more than Spade did. Its charm was its willingness to do anything for its characters, and in the last arc, those characters don't matter. In Black Clover's final bout, where character is arguably the most important in a story, BC neglects them for God knows what. We couldn't even get much update on how the characters were doing during Asta's absence, or really just how that absence made them feel. We skipped over that to get to the final arc quicker, which, if you're at all familiar with this medium, you know time skips like these are a telltale sign of a decline. I really can't read this final arc. Like, I can't finish it, I can't catch up. Everything I've read and everything I hear or see brings me such demotivation and sadness. The more potentially skipped fights, the more anti-magic and shared devil forms, the more I just don't see myself going back. MHA was important to me, so of course at some point I caught up just to properly grieve with context. It was a joy seeing all of the mistakes Gege made, mistakes that made all of JJK's fandom look dumber and dumber by the day. And when the final arc of Chainsaw Man arrives and Denji's wedding with Reze is crashed by the Blood Devil, who goes on to fight a tapestry of thoughtless Part 1 cameos, and Asa fully decked out in her dupe Hideo Kojima outfit, I will unfortunately be there just to watch like it's a car crash on upcoming traffic. But Black Clover literally got me through a rough time. It's how I further connected to mutuals. It had such an endearing cast and art style, and it gave me one of the only good anime movies to ever exist. Also, Black Clover, like stated before, was my refuge from stories that heavily disappointed me at the time. BC meant a good amount to me, and yet it turns out that it was just like every other shonen I've covered thus far, destined to fail because of a lack of forethought and passion. At least this time, I'm not gonna be there to experience it. They say there are stories that inform our thoughts, our feelings, and our taste after we consume them. I got into Black Clover pretty late, so I can't say that it had a huge effect on my outlook on manga, but I can't help but have a soft spot for stories that may not be thematically dense, but are more uniquely childish, simplistic, or hopelessly optimistic. Whether it be Gachikuta's writing that exchanges details for aesthetic, Maki's constant cheerful demeanor even in the face of real-world issues, Naruto, which as it went on became more and more difficult to still love, or Soul Eater, whose depth is kneecapped by its dialogue or sense of humor. I might always prefer a story with a lot more meat, but because of my positive experiences with Black Clover, I've always excused manga with a lot less edge as long as their hearts were abundant and in the right places. Now, I feel ashamed. I feel like I've been lowering my standards, only because, well, this is what happens when you don't expect any more from stories you like. But I don't know. Even in juvenile stories, you still expect some sort of conflict or change in the atmosphere. I mean, Christ, even Steven Hillenburg knew to lock in when he thought SpongeBob was finishing. The Goofy movie was more serious than this! What was once charming and earnest about BC turned out to be its very downfall. Its resistance to truly growing up wasn't just a momentary grasp at giving the audience just as much hope as the characters had. Its resistance towards growing up was a result of inept storytelling capabilities and a less than stellar writing style. The same things that touched me about Black Clover were the same things that ended up being signs that Black Clover will always kneecap itself when it came to greatness. And now I gotta reevaluate all the other things I like. I don't want to do that! Although, come to think of it, not wanting to evaluate what I'm consuming, huh? Oh my god, is this how the people I've criticized in my last few videos feel?